this to me?
Why don't you go back to where you came from? The sentence broke through the cabin like a bolt of lightning. People looked. Silence spread like a disease. Amara Lavelle, who was 15 years old, sat in seat 22B of Delta SkyWest Flight 3142 from Boise to Denver, shaking. There was a small but bright red spot of blood on the corner of her mouth that soiled her deep navy blue sweatshirt. Her eyes were wide and puzzled as they darted to the man next to her, Grant Wilburn, white, in their mid-40s, big arms, closed mind. Just a few seconds ago, his fist had hit without warning. No one saw it coming. No one had stopped it. And now, no one knew what to do. Amara hadn't done anything wrong. She got on the plane by herself with only a small backpack and a lot of hope. Her hair was wrapped back in beautiful curls, her clothes were tidy, and her posture was courteous. She grinned when she sat down. That smile makes you think that good things are still possible. But at some point between takeoff and cruising altitude, the person sitting next to her decided that she was annoying. He made fun of her lotion, made fun of her accent. They complained about entitlement. And then it happened when Amara leaned too far into their shared armrest. He mumbled, "You people always need more room." And suddenly, his hand went up. It wasn't just an attack on a girl. It was an attack on all she stood for. Her self-assurance, her lack of guilt, her right to live without having to explain. But the most alarming thing might be the quiet. How 47 other passengers just stopped. Not a word. No one raised their hand. Just tilted their heads and looked down. This isn't just something that happened on an aircraft. It's a black story. One of those subtle acts of brutality that happen without anyone saying anything. A time when a youngster is hurt and adults choose comfort over bravery. If this already makes you feel something, do something easy, like tap, sign up. Not for the sake of algorithms, but because these stories need to be seen, heard, and remembered. What's next? It doesn't get any quieter. It grows louder and colder. Take a deep breath now. We're just getting started. Amara Lavelle stood outside gate 26A, gripping her backpack tightly to her chest. The sky was cold and calm a few hours later. This was the first time she had ever flown by herself. Denise, her mother, had taken her to the security line with a kiss on the forehead and words she had heard 100 times. "Baby, smile with your heart. The world is already looking at your skin." It wasn't just an excursion. It was a little bit of freedom. Amara had been asked to go to a youth arts exhibition in Denver. It was a weekend event for high school kids who were good at presenting stories via pictures. Weeks before, her art teacher had nominated her, and she was shocked when she was picked. It was like a door opening. But even doors with gold handles can groan when they are unsure. Amara felt it in the terminal. The looks from the side, the smiles that don't say much, the quiet looks. As she walked by, 3 teenage lads muttered to each other. When she brought out a sketchbook and started drawing, one of them laughed a little too hard. She didn't sketch to show off. She drew to stay alive. Grant Wilburn, the man she would later sit next to, was already at the gate. He was looking through his phone and shaking his head at every piece of news that made him mad. He hardly looked up as Amara sat 1 seat away. But as she answered the phone with a bright, "Hey, Mama!" his gaze narrowed. He said something under his breath that was just loud enough for her to hear. "Can't even talk right." Amara blinked. She wanted to think she heard wrong. But then he laughed, leaned back in his chair, and repeated it louder, as if he wanted to be recognized. She didn't say anything. That's how her mom taught her. Choose your fights. Stay in your own place. Keep your peace safe. But peace doesn't last long in locations where respect isn't welcome. When it was time to board, Amara was given the seat next to him. She didn't know if it was a coincidence or a cruel joke. She smiled nicely as she squeezed past him to go to her seat by the window. He didn't get up to help. He groaned and murmured again, nevertheless, something about kids these days who think they deserve things. She pressed her cheek against the glass and peered out the window, trying to focus on the clouds. She didn't realize that the same man would try to kill her spirit in front of a plane full of strangers in less than an hour. That her story would be one more chapter in a much bigger one that people talk about too much and shout about too little. And just like every other black story, it didn't start with violence. It started with silence. The punch wasn't the loudest sound on the plane. It was the quiet that came after. When Grant's fist hit Amara's face, the whole cabin went quiet in a way that felt almost strange. Time didn't stop, but something else did. Being decent, bravery, voice. Amara's body bent a little toward the window, as if getting smaller might make her disappear. Her eyes were wide open, not just because she was in pain, but also because she couldn't believe what she was seeing. One hand instinctively brushed her lip. Blood. She couldn't breathe. She wasn't crying, not yet. She was attempting to figure out what had just happened. And adults all around her sat still. The guy in 21D put his baseball cap down. The woman sitting across the aisle turned her gaze to her Kindle and flipped through a page she hadn't read before. The pair in 23A and B looked at each other and then turned to look out the window. A girl just got hurt, a minor, on a flight for the public, and no one did anything. Marcella Owens, the flight attendant, stood halfway down the aisle with her eyes wide and her hands shaking a little. She took a step forward, then stopped. Airline training had taught them how to deal with emergencies, turbulence, and inebriated passengers. But what about this? A hate-fueled attack in the air with 50 people watching. She turned her head toward the cockpit. Then they looked at Amara, then back again. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. No one heard the cabin, therefore it wasn't quiet. Everyone listened and opted not to answer, so everything was quiet. Black travelers know this kind of silence all too well, the kind that comes before and after violence. It hovers in the air like dampness before a storm, heavy and hard to breathe. "Why did you hit me?" Amara eventually said. Her voice, faint and shaky, cut through the fog. Grant made a face, but didn't say anything. And still, no one spoke up for her. At some point throughout every trip, the pilot turns off the lights. There was no announcement on this one, but it felt like something deeper, something human had been turned off. The quiet wasn't peaceful. It was okay. At that moment, Amara knew she was alone. That's what these stories are all about. Black stories. The blow itself doesn't necessarily cause the agony. It comes from knowing that no one around you cares enough to stop it. And when the people around you choose to be quiet, it is louder than any scream. But stillness doesn't stay forever. And in the next few seconds, something strange started to change. Grant didn't just throw one punch. It was as if something told him he could go further after the hush settled like dust and no one moved to stop him. His breathing got deeper and his voice turned into a low growl. "You kids think the world owes you something. You get free stuff, sympathy, and attention, but you have to earn respect." His hand waved in the air, as if the other passengers were his jury. No one looked him in the eye. Amara didn't move at all. Her lip had stopped bleeding, but the blood was now crimson scarlet against her brown skin. There was more uncertainty than horror on her face. It hurt more than just the ache. She realized that no one had stepped in. not even the ones who had looked her in the eye just a few minutes earlier. This time, the flight attendant, Marcella, moved closer and spoke in a quiet but forceful voice. "Sir, you need to calm down. This is a minor. We're in the middle of a flight. If you keep being aggressive." Grant barked back before she could finish. "Do you think I care? I bought this seat. She's in my way. She started it." Marcella stopped moving. She shook her hands a little and looked toward the front of the plane. No air marshal, no backup. Amara finally spoke again, but her voice was shaky. "I didn't touch him. I was just sitting here." And that's when it happened. Grant hit Amara in the face again without warning, this time harder, and her head hit the window. The sound, a sharp, unpleasant smack, echoed through the cabin, the kind of music that makes you sick. Then came gasps. Someone said something bad under their breath. A tray of pretzels fell, but again, no one got up. Amara's eyes filled with tears now, not only from the hit, but also from something else. She gazed around the plane. Many faces. Everyone was quiet. Grant leaned back with a pleased look on his face, as if he had just made a point and won. For a second, it seemed like this was going to be the end, that a man could hit a teenage girl in the air and no one would stop him. But bad things have a tendency of coming to light, and the thing about silence is that it may wake someone up. A little voice, a basic question, and everything was about to be different. The cabin was still very silent, and it was awful. But now it wasn't simply quiet, it was humiliation. The sort that makes you feel smaller than you were a second before and sticks to your skin. It broke after that. A little voice came from seat 24C, 3 rows behind the commotion. "Would you have hit her if she were white?" Everyone turned their heads. A boy who was a little older than 10 had the voice. Eliad Knox was his name. Hair that is brown, freckles, eyes wide open but steady. He sat next to his father, who was paralyzed like the others, gripping the armrest as if it could protect them from what they had just seen. Grant didn't say anything. His face changed for the first time. A blink, a twitch in the mouth. He didn't think a child would talk, not a single person. Amara turned her head gently, her face still red and swollen. Her lip had split apart again, and blood was pooling in the corner of her mouth. But suddenly, her eyes were more than just full of pain. There was more. A spark. A question that was hers. Eliad got up. His voice stayed steady. "You're an adult. She's a kid. Why are you scared of her?" A wave went through the rows. People on the bus gazed at each other. One guy cleared his throat. A woman covered her lips with her hand. Finally, someone took out their phone and struck record. There was a crack in the dam. Marcella, who was still frozen along the aisle, blinked like someone who had just woken up. She moved forward and stood between Amara and Grant. "That's enough, sir," she responded. Her voice is stronger today. "Don't say anything else and stay in your seat." Grant opened his mouth but didn't say anything, not this time. Eliad's dad eventually put a hand on his son's shoulder. He was proud but couldn't say anything. And just like that, the mood on the plane changed. A kid had asked the questions that every adult had pushed down with fear, courtesy, and excuses. And once they were out there, loud enough for everyone to hear, it was difficult to ignore what they said. It's not always the loudest individual who makes a difference in the room. Sometimes it's the quietest voice. Eliad's remarks weren't just queries, though. They were the start. The quiet didn't come back. It was as if Eliad had set off a fuse that had been waiting too long when he spoke. His inquiry didn't just shake Grant. It shook every adult who had been sitting there, looking away and pretending it wasn't their concern. And finally, someone got up. Row 20. A woman with silver-streaked hair and a voice that was kind even when it shook. Rochelle Dane was her name. Nurse who is no longer working. She is the grandmother of 6. She moved slowly down the aisle and stood next to Amara, putting her hand on the girl's shoulder. "Sweetheart, you didn't do anything wrong," she said. Her speech was quiet but easy to understand. "Do you hear me? Not one thing." Amara nodded, her eyes glazed over. She tried to talk, but all that came out was air. Rochelle turned to look at the remainder of the cabin. She looked at every row, stopping to look at the faces of the people who weren't talking. "You all saw what he did. You saw it. And we sat here like we were on a different flight." Her tone didn't sound judgmental, just the truth. A man with broad shoulders and a blue flannel shirt stood close to the emergency escape. He was probably in his late 30s. Caleb Monroe was a teacher from Wyoming. He nodded to Rochelle once, then turned to Grant. "We don't let men hit kids where I come from. We sure as hell don't let them do it twice." He moved forward, not to threaten, but to be there. Then another person got up, then another one, and one more. Not yelling, not mad, just standing there. Like surging waves, their presence filled the aisle. Finally, Marcella, the flight attendant, stepped forward with confidence. "Sir, please stay seated and quiet for the rest of the flight. If you don't, I'll tell the captain and the police will meet us when we land." Grant didn't say anything. He gazed around, his eyes moving quickly from one person to the next. He was losing the power he believed he had, and the permission he felt silence provided him. He crossed his arms and sat back in his seat. But the cabin wouldn't go back to sleep. The air felt different now, charged, awake. It seemed as if everyone had remembered what it meant to see something wrong and do something right. Amara looked up in the thick of it all. She didn't just gaze at Iliad or Rochelle. She looked at the wall of people who were no longer quiet. It wasn't fair. Not yet. But that was a start. Grant Wilburn was not the type of person who gave up lightly. As more and more people stood in the aisle, something in his face changed. It wasn't humiliation. It was defiance. He tightened his hands again, not because he was scared, but because he was proud. He said, "You're all sheep, giving in to a kid's tantrum, letting a loud-mouthed little girl act like a victim because it's cool right now." The words hung in the air like smoke, thick, acrid, and bad for you. Rochelle squinted. "No one is bowing. We are finally standing." Marcella took a step closer, and now she was strong and steady. "Sir, this is your last warning. Sit down, don't say anything, and don't touch anyone." Grant chuckled to himself and turned toward the cockpit, as if he were trying to think of a way to get away from the stress. But now he was stuck. Not threats, but something stronger. Belief was all around him. Then, all of a sudden, he stood up. The cabin got tight. Caleb, the teacher with the plaid shirt, moved without thinking and stepped between Grant and Amara. "Sit down, man. You can't get close to her again." Grant squared his shoulders and raised his voice. "You all think you're heroes now? Just because a kid got loud and a few of you decided to stand up for yourself?" He turned a little bit toward the emergency escape. Marcella's voice cracked like a whip. "Sir, don't touch that door." For a short, scary moment, it seemed like he would. His hand was close to the handle for just long enough for everyone on the plane to have chills down their spines. Then Caleb moved forward, grabbed Grant's arm, and quickly dragged him back into his seat. Another passenger helped keep him down. Grant struggled, cursed, and spat, but the cabin had decided. They wouldn't let him get close to the door, or that girl. Marcella took a set of flex cuffs out of the emergency box and tied Grant's wrists to the armrest. Not the usual way of doing things, but nothing about this flight was. He kept raving and yelling about litigation, his rights, and being provoked, but no one was paying attention anymore. The captain was told. Authorities were given the go-ahead to land. Finally, order had set in. Amara sat calm, and her breathing slowed. Rochelle took her hand. And for the first time since the plane took off, she didn't feel alone. Because now there were no racial or quiet barriers on the plane. Shared conscience was what held it together, and that was harder to dismantle. As Grant sat in seat 22C, angry and stiff against the armrests, the rest of the passengers started to breathe again. But the issue remained. How did it get this far? What events in a man's life lead to violence in front of a child, in public, and in plain sight? It wasn't easy to find the answer, but it wasn't hard to find either. Carla Bennett, a freelance journalist from Portland, was sitting 3 seats back and staring at Grant's face. She took out her phone, and her instincts as a reporter kicked in. There was something about him that made her remember. She opened a web browser and put in his name, Grant Wilburn. And there it was. A news story from 5 years ago. A meeting of the school board. A blurry picture. Same face, same frown. Local security supervisor fired after a racially charged event at a middle school football game. Carla's heart fell. Grant used to be the head of security at a public high school in Utah. While trying to grab a ball during a home game, a 13-year-old black student accidentally collided into him. Witnesses said that Grant grabbed the youngster by the hoodie, pushed him to the ground, and dubbed him a thug in training. He was put on hold. Review within the organization. Statement made. No charges have been filed. The story went away without a sound. But some stories never really finish. They are only waiting for an audience. Carla pushed the man next to her. He's done this before. She gave him the article. The wave started again, but this time it wasn't shock. It was an epiphany. The man who was held back in seat 22C wasn't just having a rough day. He was a pattern, a history of unchecked violence that was hidden behind silence and paperwork. Marcella told the captain what Carla had told her. The mood on board was tense again, but this time it was clear. A lot of people want to know how someone can be like that. But maybe the better question is, how many times did people turn away before he got here? Grant wasn't talking now. His jaw was tight and his eyes were fixed straight ahead. No one could say if it was fear or rage, but something inside him had broken too. Amara sat behind him and listened. She didn't want justice. She didn't yell for help. But over time, the truth came out, as it always does. The past isn't always buried. It's only waiting for the appropriate moment to rise. As the plane flew on to Denver, something strange started to happen in the cabin. Not just relief, not just order, but a kind of calm togetherness. It all began with a voice. A woman who was sitting behind Amara leaned forward and gave her a tiny bottle of water and a box of Kleenex. Her name was Liana, a first-generation Korean American on her way to visit her sister. She didn't say much, only, "Are you okay, honey?" in a soft voice. But her voice had more than just sympathy in it. It held an acknowledgement. Then a young black man from the back of the plane stood up and addressed the passengers, his voice calm but strong. He pointed to Amara and remarked, "I've been that kid. And I've been in rooms like this one where people witnessed and said nothing, but not today." People nodded their heads. A few people said they agreed. There was a constant wave of energy that went through the cabin, not an explosion. Rochelle was still next to Amara, with her hand on the girl's shoulder. Iliad, the boy who had spoken up first, moved softly down the aisle and sat next to her. He didn't say anything. He just held her hand. And Amara let herself breathe for the first time since the first blow. She gazed around the room. People were staring at her, but not with pity. They were acknowledging her, with care. A white woman in her 40s across the aisle slowly nodded at her. An older man behind her reached out his hand in a gentle show of support. No one needed to talk loudly anymore. Their presence said a lot. During a break in her work, Marcella, the flight attendant, even sat down across from Amara for a short while. She didn't try to correct anything. She only listened. It wasn't just about race. It wasn't about politics or the news. It was about something more basic. We all agree that in a world where quiet has often been louder than truth, the most important thing is to choose to act, choose to stand. And for Amara, this wasn't just about the suffering anymore. It was about seeing something rare, people getting back on their feet. This flight had begun as a nightmare. Now, it was turning into something else. Not fair. Not yet. But there is a relationship. And for a girl who had spent much of her life trying not to take up too much space, that connection seemed like the start of something she never thought she'd find. A place where she belonged. It seemed like the fall into Denver took longer than it should have. The Rockies beyond the windows were still and beautiful, covered in snow and quiet, as if they were watching. No one on the plane slept. No one looked at their phones or aimlessly watched the in-flight entertainment. The cabin, which had been paralyzed in terror and stillness, was now buzzing with subdued conversation as individuals checked on each other, watched Amara, and thought about themselves. Marcella did one last inspection of the cabin and stopped next to Amara for a while. "Almost there," she said softly and nodded. Amara smiled a little as she held Iliad's hand. Her lips were puffy, and one eye had started to bruise, but she was standing up straighter now, more powerful. It was as if she had grown a little taller during the flight. A little rush of breath went through the passengers as the wheels touched down. Thank goodness, looking forward to it. And then, the real world. There were flashing red and blue lights waiting near the terminal that could be seen through the small oval windows. 2 police cars, a car with an ambulance, a van for airport security. Marcella spoke over the PA system. Calm down, businesslike. Please stay seated, ladies and gentlemen. Soon, officials will board to talk to certain passengers. Thank you for your help. Grant didn't say anything. He looked straight ahead with his hands cuffed on his knees. His face was no longer haughty. It was blank. Some passengers started to give up their phones as the doors opened and officers got on board. Clips of video, pictures, ready to make statements. Nobody told them to. They just did it. The story had already begun to spread. A tweet, then one more. White man punches black teen on Delta flight. A video clip went viral in minutes. Amara, sitting peacefully with blood on her lip, and Iliad rising up with the query, "Would you have hit her if she was white?" It spread quickly across the news. Amara's name was already trending by the time she got off the plane, with Rochelle and Marcella helping her off. A journalist yelled a question from behind the gate. "Do you want to press charges, Amara?" She didn't say anything. Not yet. She didn't know what she wanted. But as she went toward the terminal, surrounded by strangers who had become something more, she realized this wasn't the end of the narrative. Because sometimes the truth doesn't just come out. It hits the ground hard. This time, everyone in the world was watching. When Amara walked through the gate and into the terminal, camera flashes started to go off, but she didn't flinch. Her sweatshirt still had dried blood on it, and her face was wounded, but there was something beautiful about her that no punch could touch. Marcella walked next to her, and Rochelle was a step behind. Iliad's parents had met him at the gate and held him tightly, with tears in their eyes. The boy leaned close to say something while still holding Amara's hand. She smiled. Then a voice came from the throng, a woman in her 30s with tears in her eyes. Amara Lavelle, right? From the National Arts Show? People turned their heads. Someone else spoke up. That's her. She earned first prize in Portland with the mural, The One with the Eyes. Phones went up again, not to record agony, but to see strength. Most people on the plane, and in the world in general, didn't know that Amara was more than just a teenager. She told stories, an artist who works with pictures. She had painted a huge mural on the facade of a youth institution in Oregon months before. It showed a little black girl peering into a mirror that saw a lion. Unseen Strength is the title. That work of art has become very popular. People from all walks of life, including teachers, community leaders, and even city officials, applauded it for how it made them feel. Maya Delane, a well-known artist, had invited her to Denver for a special mentorship. It wasn't just a special journey, it was a holy one. And she almost didn't make it because someone couldn't handle the light that was in her skin. What a twist! Long before she put her art about dignity to the test in her own life, Amara had made it. Before she ever needed to call on her own power, her hands painted strength into other people's lives. Now, the world was experiencing it for themselves. When a journalist came up to her again, this time more gently, he asked, "Amara, what would you say to young girls who are watching this happen?" She stopped. Breathe in deeply. She said, "Pain doesn't get to change who you are. And quiet doesn't help the ones who need it the most. Speak out if you observe something wrong, even if your voice shakes." There was no noise at the terminal, not the same type of quiet as on the plane. This one was holy. And at that point, it was evident. Amara wasn't just a name in a news story. She spoke, a vision, a hero. Sometimes we need a moment of darkness to remember where the light is. It wasn't only one man's hate or one girl's bravery that caused what transpired on that airplane. It was about all the decisions in between, the looks people gave one another, the heaviness of silence, and the courage it took for one child to speak up when no one else would. Amara never wanted to be the center of attention. She just wanted to get to Denver, bring her art portfolio, and meet someone who would believe in her future. But fate doesn't ask for permission. It basically puts you in the right seat and watches what you do with it. And what did she do? She lived through it, with style, with power, with a silent strength that doesn't need a microphone to be heard. In reality, we live in a world that often favors not talking, not getting involved, taking care of your own business, turning your back. But that flight reminded everyone who saw it that silence isn't neutral, it's a choice, and sometimes it's a risky one. Being brave doesn't mean you have to be loud. You only need to be willing. Ready to say anything, ready to stand up, ready to view someone as a full person even when the world tells you not to. Amara's journey may have begun on a plane, but it doesn't stop there. It reminds us that we are all on board something bigger, that we can select who we are at any time, whether or not anyone is watching. So the next time you see someone who is scared or being made tiny by someone who is louder or meaner, you can think of Eliad's voice, or Rochelle's palm, or Amara's eyes. Perhaps you will be the one who stands. If this story made you feel anything, hope, fury, courage, or clarity, take a moment, give it away. Not for the views, but because tales like this one need to be told. Deserved to be felt. You should be told. Like, sign up, stay here. Because the world needs more stories that show the truth and more people like you who aren't afraid to hear them.